Welcome to Unapologetically Technical. My name is Jesse Anderson, and this is the show that's different. We go deep, we go all the way down. With me today is my good friend, Doug Meil. He is an author and an architect with a lot of experience, but we're going to be going through the rise and fall of Explorys and IBM Watson Health. Welcome to the show, Doug. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jesse. Happy to be here. I'm a software and a data guy with over 30 years of experience. I have over 20 years also in product software, which is, as folks in this podcast know, is a distinct form of software engineering when you're delivering software products as opposed to custom solutions. Nothing wrong with custom solutions. I've built those too. And I've also spent over 20 years in the data warehousing space, both on-premise and also cloud. And all of those things intersect with the Explorys and Watson Health experience.
Well, welcome, Doug. I'm excited to start digging in. Let's start a little bit with your background, your educational background. Your bachelor's is in decision science, and you have a master's in mechanical engineering. Tell me about it.
No, it was a master's in engineering management.
Ah, even better. Okay, engineering management. Okay, well, tell me more about that.
It's all good. So back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth and I was an undergraduate, I didn't know what career options were available for people that like numbers. I mean, now it's easy, right? I thought that if you liked numbers and analysis, then you should be an accountant. That was the only profession that I knew of, and this is again a long time ago. And then I ran into this thing called decision science, which is now is recognized as a data science degree, but it was this kind of oddball quantitative analysis major that I loved. And people usually combined it with something. So I was actually a major in decision sciences, and then I ended up with a minor in information systems, and ended up going basically the software development route. And I continually used those stat skills as a supplement in the career. Like anytime you're doing performance testing, you wind up creating charts and explaining to people like, no, we need to find these, we need to explain these outliers. We can't just, it's not like the Olympics where you can just discard them because you assume the Russian judges are against you. Like we need to let's dig in. And then so I was working for many years, and I ended up going to school part-time, still working full-time. Back in the mid-90s, it was also quite trendy to get an MBA. I don't know if you remember this, but I didn't feel like doing that, but I wanted to continue my education. And Case Western Reserve University had a program for engineering management where it was a half engineering management, and then half of the program were it was a technical degree on whatever your interests were. And they were like what I call real engineers in that program: chemical engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. And I thought it was really interesting because there were roughly 60 people in that program, and I was only one of a handful of software people. And I realized that how similar the product development lifecycle was for people that were developing what I would call real things, as opposed to air quotes just software. And every time somebody would cite an example of something that was easy, you'd say, like, let's pick something easy, like a tire. You'd have like 3 people yelp who were chemists at like Goodyear, which is an acronym, who'd be like, you have no idea how complicated tires are. So there was no example that you could just pick as, let's just start with something simple, which I love. So it was a good background. That was a 3.5-year slog. I was again still working full time at the time. So and then concurrently with that, I started my first 8 years were in financial systems, working for T Corp, and those were really interesting times. Advent of client server, that was when Java launched. That's when the first Java application servers came out. That's when the first big internet the launch of the internet. I mean, at least in a public way. And a lot of that was my first taste of data integration. I did a lot of mainframe integration back then, and then that became a theme of my for the rest of my career, is basically connecting things.
Speaking of connecting things, you ran the Cleveland Big Data Meetup, and I think that was how I originally met you years ago. And so tell me about that, and tell me how much you spent in bulk pizza orders.
Thank you. So I started the Cleveland Big Data Meetup. It was originally called the Cleveland Hadoop User Group, and then it shortly it got renamed. But I had gotten a taste of some great meetups in the San Francisco Bay Area and in New York, with the Hadoop communities, and I wanted some of that in Cleveland. Started off very, very small and very, very modestly, where the maybe a group of 10 or 12 people, and every single person at that first meeting was somebody that either worked with me or knew me from a prior job. And it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And the group is still growing now, still existing. It's called Cleveland AI and Data. I handed it off to another person last year who's doing a great job running it. But yeah, 14 years, 81 meetups, and there's got to be at least $25,000 for the bulk pizza orders. I got really good at ordering, at booking meetings, and doing bulk pizza orders. Um, yeah, no, but it was all about connecting people, all about a great intersection of technical specialties. I had multiple colleges there regularly. I had multiple um, companies there regularly. So you had new people, had newer grads, less experience. You had more experienced folks. So in different industries, and I'm proud to say there's over 4,500 members that are in the meetup now, and it's still meeting every other month.
Good. You're also part of the ACM. So you posted something the other day. You write regularly on it, and we don't have much thought leadership in data anymore, to be honest. Which is incredibly sad to me. We have memes, we have that sort of thing, but
Yep.
it was good to see some real thought leadership there.
I
You were
appreciate
also
that.
an HBase committer. And then the one that we're really going to focus on this is the book that you wrote about Explorys and IBM Watson. So you kind of summarized what you were doing. So let's kind of come forward to where you were doing a lot of software architecture. I I was curious. You went straight out of school to becoming a software architect. How did that happen?
Well, no, that's not what happened. I was if that may be the only thing that's listed on my resume, but I was a key corp for 8 years, and so you start off as basically a programmer analyst, and then up and up and
Work
up
your
and
way
up and
up.
up.
Okay.
And so that's where I wound it up. But that's where I wound up. But no, I was a yeah, junior developer, mid, senior. Um, that was a progression.
Okay. And from there, you became the director of product development and director of software architecture at Everstream and Concurrent. And that was really that first time that you were started working on data. What made you so interested in data?
Um, it was a problem space that I had heard of, but hadn't hadn't worked directly in. I mean, there was a data warehousing project at Key, even in the '90s on the mainframe. It's just that wasn't what I was working on. But there was an opportunity to. So what Everstream was doing was basically distributed data collection for video on demand systems, and then warehousing, and then building a data warehousing solution. So it had elements that were very familiar to me in terms of distributed data collection. And then the product set also included the and now what. And so there was a warehousing component and then reporting applications on top of that. So it was a full suite, everything from integration to the end user solution. So that was sold as it was basically sold as a software stack to cable companies.
Okay. And then from there, you went to Explorys that eventually
Yeah,
became IBM Health. We're going to talk a great deal about that later on. So we'll just put a placeholder there.
it's all good.
And then you went and became a portfolio architect at Ontada and McKesson. What exactly is a portfolio architect?
Somebody that's over an architect over the entire suite of applications. So it's basically just a fancy way of saying the scope of technical responsibilities is over the entire portfolio of the entire of all of the solutions that are in the in our division or in that division.
Okay. Yes, I've known a few. They didn't call them quite portfolio architects, but they're basically, if it's a group company or there's a lot of group
Yeah.
pieces, you're making sure that they all integrate well.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about in your background before we jump into talking about? No. Okay.
No, no, go
Well,
for it.
one of the things I found interesting about your before we start is most people are only about the success. If you look on LinkedIn, everybody is I I left school at 18 and I made, 10 million or 20 million or something. It's very rare for people to say, yeah, we blew through $1 billion and we have nothing to show for it. And those are the much different stories. And those are sort of the ones I seek out because you your huge success stories, sometimes they're a mix of luck, sometimes they're a mix of skill or both, or they're one-offs. But I think we can learn far more by saying, hey, this is this project that failed and here is why it failed. So that's kind of the
Oh,
setup
amen to
for
that.
yes.
Amen to that. On a related, we could talk about this later. One of my hobbies is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And one of the things, if you want to get good at Jiu-Jitsu, you need to lose a lot. So like it's a good, it's a good ego check. And so, yeah, this is bumps and bruises and failing. Like this is something that it's not something you avoid. Like it's a part of the process. It's a part of the path.
Yeah. So what's your belt level out of curiosity?
I'm a purple belt.
Okay.
Yeah, four
Doing
strike
enough
purple belt.
rolling. Congrats.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Well, let's go over and start going through the whiteboarding part.
Cool. It might be easier to start with the book story, the context first, and then get into the details because I think it'll help explain.
You want to
So
do
is
that
that
with that
fair?
whiteboard?
Yeah, just a little bit of background on why the book, because I think that sets up more some of the technical details. Is that fair?
Yeah. Okay. So to help kind of understand the flow and before we start whiteboarding things out, Doug, could you tell us some of the background about the story and what happened, and then that will help us understand as we start whiteboarding things out?
Super happy to. The story of Explorys and IBM Watson Health and the book that I wrote covers the period of 2009 to roughly 2019. So Explorys was founded as a Cleveland Clinic Innovations partner in 2009, independent company, and
And for people who don't know, Cleveland Clinic is one of the top tier in the world medical institutions.
appreciate that. Thank you. And so the a couple of folks who were also at Everstream, prior company that I was working at, we were the ones that were in the technical formation of the company. We did not come in with any healthcare experience, but we did come in with a lot of data experience, and that's why that Everstream experience is so important to the Explorer story. The having the clinic as a resource for um, basically your our key stakeholder, our key user, was important. Our lighthouse customer, so to speak, as people say in the product the product development area, hugely important. And we very quickly signed in a bunch of deals, built a product portfolio, had customer had healthcare facing applications for population searching, a complex suite for healthcare measures and registries, ways to analyze patient populations. It was very, very complicated, and then we also uh, had a life science and pharma for what's called secondary use in healthcare. We had both sides, solutions for both sides. And so, unlike Everstream, where we were selling software, which was installed at on premise for our customers' locations, this was a service, and so that meant we can move a lot faster, and we had more control over our infrastructure. And all this is going to play in those technical details. So we were the largest clinical data set in the country at our time of our acquisition of around 50 million patients deduped. And IBM had been trying to get into the healthcare space for a number of years. Watson for Oncology predated the division's formation. IBM bought a company called Curum for social services software a couple of years earlier. They had been kind of tinkering and throwing out things, but nothing had congealed. But our acquisition was one of the foundation acquisitions in April 2015 when the division was formed and announced. And then, unfortunately, IBM wound up going from founding the founding the division. A lot of press, a lot of fanfare. It was in a variety of media, both technical, healthcare, and in the mainstream media. To about 3 years later, having a big implosion and laying off a bunch of people. And unfortunately, Explorys was a casualty. So the Explorys business is no more. It died basically in 2018. Another company called Fitel, which was acquired at the same time as Explorys, also was mortally wounded. That doesn't exist anymore. It's a crazy story of ambition um, and and misalignment. And the further rub in the wound is a lot of the companies that we were competing with and beating back in 2015 are still around, which shows that there was a market need for what we were doing. And not only that, but there are new companies that continue to be created that are doing versions of what Explorys did. So yeah, there was no reason for Explorys to be destroyed. No good reason anyway. I mean, you can mismanage a company any which way, but instead of taking Explorys and up into the right, so to speak, unfortunately, it was an unmitigated disaster. So why write the book? Why tell the story? To your point, why not just forget about it? Well, as you might expect, in 2015, with all of the press announcing it, oh my God, I almost forgot Jeopardy. So Jeopardy, the shadow of Jeopardy, is cast all through this story. So Jeopardy is so influential in terms of expectations. So if a machine can beat Ken Jennings at Jeopardy, AI can do anything, right? It can solve healthcare. Like that's how high the expectations were back then. And so all we need
And that
to
was what the
do.
commercials were saying back then too.
That's what the commercials. You had talking computers. IBM marketing is very slick, and the expectations were just through the roof. Um, and IBM was calling it at the time cognitive computing, which really bothered me because if you went to any big data conference at the time, you had people describing machine learning with a pretty standard vocabulary, right? Supervised, unsupervised. Within supervised, you have classifiers and regression algorithms, like good different implementations, but people were using the same vocabulary to describe machine learning, and IBM was saying things like cognitive computing, maybe foreshadowing, maybe 8 years later with generative AI, but like that certainly didn't exist at the time. And so yeah, the expectations were just through the roof. And yeah, that was, and so like when the division imploded in 2018, the same people that were writing about hey, here's what IBM was trying. Another set of stories going like, what the heck? And a great, so the IEEE Spectrum, kudos to Eliza Strickland for writing 2 great articles in 2018, 2019. She, I think of all of the people that were writing about Watson Health's demise, she did the best job back then of really stepping back and looking at the crater and saying, like, what happened? Not just that it failed, that was plain, but but just that comparison of the goals and the ambitions to what actually happened. But what I felt wasn't told and wasn't expressed was what the acquisition experience was, because a lot of her story was about like Watson, Watson for oncology, and a lot of the other pharma and life sciences stories. And it's not her fault. She didn't have line of sight into that. She didn't know what we knew as living, as living it. And so, as a first step, I wrote a piece for the ACM called "What Happened to Watson Health" in early 2021. That got a lot of attention. And then people kept kidding me about like, "Hey, when's the book coming out? When's the book coming out?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I can't write a book." But I kept getting the jab, and then I kept writing more pieces for the ACM, gaining more writing confidence. I wrote I think 8 pieces for the ACM in 2021. I wrote 11 in 2022. I was really on a tear. And by the time I got to around 20, I was actually feeling pretty confident as a technical writer. And then the final poke was a college professor of mine, who had since retired, but I've kept in touch with him. Said, "So when's the book coming out?" I'm like, "Oh man, checkmate! Like you can't say no to a former college professor." So I was like, "Okay, like I don't know how I'm gonna do this, but like I have to try now." And so that's how all of these the experiences that kind of overlapped. If I hadn't have been writing for the ACM, I never would have gotten a publishing contract because I wouldn't have had anything to show for it. I wouldn't have anything, wouldn't be able to prove myself even at that point as a writer, and I wouldn't have been able to demonstrate the interest. So the writing process is a longer story, but I think it's time to jump into the technical details of like, okay, so what happened? What was the acquisition experience really? From from IBM Watson Health, and what was so hard about that acquisition. So let's jump over.
All right, yeah, let's start the whiteboard section.
Explorys, we were all deployed. So again, you have to remember, I'm so envious of what exists today with again, Azure Databricks, or Databricks in general, Snowflake. So many cloud native tools make it easy to do big data projects. But back in the day, we were doing all of this ourselves in our own data, in our own colo. So we were using. We were all deployed in a Cleveland data center called Expedient. I give them credit in the book, so I want to call them out now. And the big technical decision, as I explain in the book, is we wanted to be a service, not sell software. Believe me, when we were starting out, we had lots of people saying, "Hey, we like your stuff. We wanted to be able to deploy it on our own data center." We were like, "No, like it's a service. This is where we need to control the environment. We can't give you the features the way that they run in a prepackaged in a VM. We're running in a big data environment practically across the across the entire stack. So all of this was in a colo. We had a device called an HDG, which we would rack and stack in our customer's data center to act basically as a store and forward mechanism. And this is dating back from 2009, 2010. We wanted to be able to make sure that from an integration standpoint, we could run on the schedules we need. We can get the data that we need, and then hold
almost
it
like a distributed CDC.
Yeah, and then hold it until we can pull it up. So we were using ActiveMQ in a big way. Again, this is using the open source that was available at the time. So we would rack those things, have connectivity. We'd pull them in. We had a series of gateways that were let's see. I think the sticky note makes a.
I just drew that for you.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Thanks. Yep. Yeah, we had a gateway. Actually,
you had a gateway before the ActiveMQ?
Yeah, no. We basically had a gateway for pulling up the collecting all of the data from the variety of the help data gateways. Basically, pull it into our environment. Where we wound up was also we had I'm adding another one. Your classic data lake. So this is basically our landing zone. So this is a Hadoop cluster. We ended up with a joke. We called this one a data reservoir. This was so data would start in the gateway, get published to. We pick it up from ActiveMQ. We'd publish it to our data lake. This is where our ETLs were happening. We would publish it to HBase tables, which we were using for our internal data model. This cluster here was around 120. I'm doing this from memory right now. It's in my book. Around 120 nodes. These tended to be more more storage heavy. Data reservoir was around 260, I think, at the highest point. We had a variety of solutions that were all driven from the same data prep. We had an Explorer application, which was using. It's a web application that also had a complex set of in-memory search bits, of compressed search bits, to do fast searching. We had an application for EPM. EPM registry.
What does EPM stand for?
Enterprise Performance Management. Sorry. So that was a performance management application, and so all of the main calculations are being done, in the reservoir, of course. And then we had two different supermart. Oh man, where's my cursor? Two different supermart instances. You had supermart for providers, and this is basically your classic, data mart. You had one for healthcare one for healthcare companies, healthcare organizations, and one for life sciences for de-identified data. So these were completely different stacks, completely different instances, completely. One of them has provider oriented, as obviously has PHI. Because it's meant for those healthcare organizations. For life sciences, we could license therapeutic data sets, de-identified therapeutic data sets, accessed within our environment. And a lot of people say, they talk about, unified pipelines. Like Explorys really had it. We really did have, one core pipeline that was driving all of this stuff. And it was pretty impressive. There was
Is my label there of data reservoir being HBase? Is that correct?
it was HBase for the internal data model, and then a ton of MapReduce jobs for further data cleaning and calculations. So the engines. I'm going to add a sticky note. Pipeline calculation, pipelines for analytics. The data reservoir is really was the workhorse. So yeah, it was HBase was the internal data model. Again, the registry engine, the hundreds of measures getting calculated for every for every customer, refreshed every day. Risk models, everything like that. That was all happening here in this main cluster. And then we had certain things that were getting published. The compressed bits, this would refresh. The compressed bit sets would refresh, and then the application would then see new results, and then we would publish whole new data sets for every organization every day. This was a huge oversimplification, but that's basically what Explorys looked like. It was about 120 nodes, around 250 nodes, and then these were obviously we had multiple application servers there, so it was for failover and performance reasons. And then these we were using Vertica for Supermart. Those were, I think, like 40 node clusters each, plus a failover cluster. So there was a lot. The total footprint was, well over 1,000 servers, which is not bad. I mean, when you're talking about like a company in the Midwest, like we weren't Google sized, but when you're talking about a 2009 to 2019 era. This is a pretty darn big footprint, for a data shop.
Yeah, it definitely was. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about as you were going through this. This was for that time. It was quite big,
and a QA environment. So everything you see on here times two. Plus a smaller development environment. So like you have production, then you have a almost equal size QA environment, and then you have a smaller development environment. So you have three of these, prod, QA, and development.
Yeah, there's so much of this as you think about this that's changed. Or I guess the other thing you could look at this and why Cloudera is, for example, business model is it changed so much with the cloud. Is this would be completely different in cloud, as you mentioned, with
Yep.
Snowflake or what have you, Databricks.
Yeah, the functional steps would still exist, but the how would be very different. I mean, you wouldn't have like this hard statically deployed, this statically deployed that. I mean, like again, I love what's available today in the current environment, but like it's one of those things like if somebody like you, but you also wouldn't have what you have today if we didn't go through this era and say, my God, this is very powerful, but is there an easier way to do this?
Well, I think it's actually worth pointing out. It's something that I've pointed out many times. This This is a lot of operational complexity, architectural, and software complexity. What's changed now is the operational complexity has gone down significantly, but our architectural and programming hasn't changed that much. It's gotten a little bit easier.
Yep.
And this is what I think virtually every influencer, frankly, every manager does not understand. This is easier operationally, not architecturally or software wise.
Yep. and the things we had to do in this environment, oh man, so many external, I mean, things that you still have to do today. But we had regular pen tests with a third-party security firm. This was HIPAA, so something to remember. So we had audits for that because you're dealing with healthcare information. The other thing to mention is that because, like, although somebody might say, well, AWS was created in 2006, right, which is true, and we could have tried to do this in AWS, no healthcare organization was willing to put their data in the cloud back in 2009. I mean, so this made people, quite frankly, they were much more comfortable with this, of saying, no,
People weren't comfortable with Hadoop at that time either.
It was less specifically about Hadoop, because again, this was a service. Like, we weren't expecting our customers to run the Hadoop clusters, but more specifically that we could actually physically go to the data center and touch the boxes. Like, this was our environment. We managed it. So when we worked with a healthcare organization, we could say, yep, we are ingesting your data, and this is the exact path it's going, and it's going into servers that we manage in a colo where we have access to it. Does that make sense? Yes. And this is way back before it. People were, like, comfortable just saying, yeah, go drop the data in an S3 bucket. I don't care where it is. Like, this is back in 2009, 2010, where people were like, I don't trust the cloud. I mean, yeah, you can put your website on it, but like, not healthcare data, not HIPAA. And so, yeah, it was not just something that we did. Like, it was something we had to do to get the business up. And if we had tried to be purists and say, no, we're going to go cloud only, like, Explorys never would have happened, because no one would have trusted us to say, yeah, go take your healthcare data. You may be right in 10 years, but there wouldn't be a company. And so, yeah, it was, and even if this wound up being not Hadoop, like, the only way to do it at that time was to manage the infrastructure yourself. Again, and we had a hosting partner in Expedient, and where we wound up with the Hadoop is an important story. And it was the Everstream experience at the time. So the platform we were using was Oracle. And as anybody that knows, that's worked in the Oracle environment, for data warehousing, you need Oracle Enterprise. Why? Because you have to partition your tables. Because, like, if you don't use Oracle Enterprise and partition your tables will wind up being unmanageable and unperformant. And the Oracle Enterprise is expensive. And so if you have, and again, Oracle's a big company, successful company. They are enthusiastic about enforcing their licenses, and they are also not cheap. And so, having lived through that once, and including an Oracle audit or two, we were like, we've got to do something different. Like, at the center, if we're going to go big, and this is back even before, like, big data maybe even got super popular, 2009. The big data ecosystem was still forming, right? They were like, okay, hey, there's this thing called Hadoop. Let's try it. So it was a non-trivial business risk on our part to say we're gonna try this ecosystem. But a main driver was less even that we believed in Hadoop, but more of, like, where we had come from, and we knew we didn't want to pin our hopes all on one vendor who had the potential to squeeze us. Does that make sense?
Oh, it was I was at Cloudera. You're telling me the story of many people who switched to Cloudera. But when you were talking about the business risk, I would say that your biggest business risk is right there on HBase.
Agreed. In retrospect, and again, I say this with the utmost respect to the HBase community, like, if Hive with updates existed, like, that's probably what we would have gone with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But back in the early days, like, that was the framework that could do mutations, right, on data. So if you wanted a framework that was distributed and could update data, that was it. So that's what we went with. And we obviously didn't use it on the further right hand side of the picture for for data warehousing, but that was again, in retrospect, I love things like delta tables that the Databricks has, like basically that Hive with update. It's like that was something that I wish that the Hive community had built in earlier, because it like that warehouse case is like that's what was missing in the early days of Hadoop. And so again, with the utmost respect to the HBase community, who was fantastic. We went with the HBase because it was the only framework that was around, or at least the biggest one at the time. And so we had to encapsulate it, and like the customers never saw it, but that was that was definitely. I mean, HBase did well, but it definitely you had to be really really smart to use it, and it was sort of meant for rocket scientists, not necessarily in main general purpose applications. But that's what we did at the time, and that's why.
Okay. So this kind of gives us the initial starting point for Explorys. Does that set us up well for start talking about the acquisition then?
Absolutely. And so
let's go to Whiteboard 2 then.
Well, actually, let's leave this, and I can start adding things on. Or can we copy it? Can we do a copy of this?
Let's see. I don't believe so. Yeah, I don't think there was a copy paste. Sorry.
That's okay.
We'll just mutate this one then.
So the first
actually, just a second. Oh, there is a duplicate. Okay. I've duplicated, and we're on 2 now.
All right, got it. I think I'm on 2 now. I'm gonna do this. Am I on 2?
Yep.
So let's talk about what happens in an acquisition. So IBM has a process called blue washing, broadly speaking, for any application to basically make you look like an IBM company now. And this includes everything from reviewing the logos, which starts with an IBM company, getting everybody on IBM email and payroll and benefits, and reissuing the laptops. So now you have an IBM issued laptop, and I mean it's a huge thing. There are reasons for it. And any company needs to have, unless you're going to manage completely separately, right? Like there's reasons why you want to bring people into the fold. Does that make sense? So I'm not knocking blue washing like in general. The question though is, and we did all that stuff, right? We got IBM badges, and we new benefits and all that stuff, right? New laptops, et cetera, et cetera. The hard part comes into the products, which is like, okay, so what does it mean what does it mean to be an IBM product now, especially one in Watson Health, especially one where Watson Health wants to have a unified set of healthcare solutions. So this is where the hard decisions come from, right? And also when. So if we also step back a little bit, if you remember, IBM back in the 2010s was going through an existential crisis. Like that was a whole decade of revenue decline. I think people forget that, but it was a quarter over quarter and revenue decline. And I think they only had 1 year where the revenue was up, and it was only up by like 1%. So it's like they were going through some tough times in terms of what they wanted to be. Another thing I mentioned in the book is everybody remembers Sun Microsystems, right? Hottest company of the second half of the 1990s, and then a decade later, ignominiously acquired by Oracle, right? HP was splitting up, So there was a real concern. I mean, IBM was a huge company, still making money. There was a real concern of like, where are we going? And unfortunately, going back to the Jeopardy case, there was this pressure from management, from the highest levels of IBM, of saying we need billions of dollars of revenue. We need billions of dollars of revenue now, and we need billions of dollars of IBM revenue in IBM products, technical products. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there
Not
was
consulting. They wanted products out there.
Yeah, they wanted products. Well, I mean, they also want consulting money too. But it was like IBM, 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 IBM. Like everything needs to be IBM, and that was basically the equivalent of turning every knob to 11, like all at the same time. And again, strategically, I appreciate the desire to say have everything be IBM, right? But like at what product cost? Does that make sense? Because like now, like every conversation is internally focused as opposed to what does the customer want. And so like so there were two that started off initially, which is, can I write on this thing?
Yep.
Oh man, this thing is not clicking on me. I'll create a new sticky note. So the biggest one that came up was SoftLayer. Oh man, come on. I'm going to move this one up to the top. So SoftLayer is as a hosting layer. So as folks, so IBM had multiple hosting solutions. At the time, SoftLayer was just the biggest one customer facing, in the public. The problem was that SoftLayer itself was an acquisition less than 2 years before the creation of Watson Health. So it was this very weird, like, amalgamation of people. And when we're looking at their pricing, and I tell this story in the book, we were like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, we're paying retail. Like, you want us to go from this, if you can see where my cursor's, I'm going to use the fancy thing.
You use the,
yeah,
probably talking about the commercial colo.
Exactly. So like, we're talking about like going from our commercial colo up to SoftLayer, and you guys expect us to pay retail pricing, and you expect us to pay for this out of our own business unit. Like, what? Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention, is IBM didn't want just billions in revenue, it also wanted profitability. As anyone that's ever been in a product company or any business concern, there's a big difference between growing revenue and being profitable. I get it, profitability is important, but like that's a whole nother level of operational maturity, and a big knob. Sometimes it takes a while to first build up the revenue, and then over time tighten up your operational maturity, such that you can become profitable. And doing everything all at once is awfully tough. And so the first strategic thing, and man, we had so many conversations about this, of like, just like, we can't afford it. Like, we literally can't afford this. Like, it's going to destroy our business case. And so right off the bat, you say, like, who pays for blue washing? Does that make sense? Like, who pays for this? Like, if you want us to go in SoftLayer, will you pay for it? Because like, okay, I could see that if you want us to run there, but like, we can't do it at retail pricing. The next thing that we ran into was the technical capabilities, because I don't think anybody at SoftLayer actually believed what we were doing. Like, in this, in our infrastructure, we were like, yeah, we got 120 of these, we got 250 of these, or we had something I don't have in here. I got to give a shout out to Arista. We had some very sophisticated switches and networking gear. And our sysops team was, our DevOps team was very, very, very good from an infrastructure standpoint. And SoftLayer was just not that. They were meant for a, like small to medium-sized website. Does that make sense? I got a database, I got an app server, I've got a web tier. Like it was meant for a lot more smaller infrastructure and not, much less so in a big data play. So just right off the bat, we were at loggerheads with them just on this point alone. And then you get into things like actually, no, I'll do it in blue. Oh, I should change this color. There we go. Now I'm color coordinated. So SoftLayer, again, IBM. The other one was the fact that we were using Vertica as our customer facing marts, right? Boy, that really made people upset because this was in your face, right? There's no way. I mean, customers knew you were using Vertica. Why? Because we had to give them a Vertica JDBC driver to configure their tools. To connect, we had to give them Vertica SQL documentation. So this was an in your face. There's no way of hiding it. It's not an implementation detail. And so IBM was like, look, you guys need to replace Vertica. So now we get into the next problem. With what? And who's paying for it? So you had, depending on who you talk to, the answer could have been Netezza, which was a data warehousing appliance. But Netezza didn't run on SoftLayer at the time. So they were like, okay, we could replace Vertica we could try replacing Vertica with Netezza, but you guys are telling us you want us out of our own colo, but Netezza won't even run up here. Like, what are you talking about? You had BigSQL, which was if you remember Cloudera's Impala engine, it was basically IBM's version of Impala that would run
an MPP database.
Yeah, NMPP, exactly. And that looked actually pretty promising, but we kept hearing conflicting stories of whether that was going to be supported or not. And then you had a couple different versions of IBM's DB2, which could, allegedly run in distributed mode depending on the configuration, and some other products that had to be utilized like GPFS for a file server. And then it ultimately leads the next question of like, who's paying for this? Because what we really would have appreciated was, hey, could you guys prove that this works? And how about you run a pilot? You know what I mean? Like we're not against it. Like, I get it. Like we were badged, after acquisition, we were badged IBM employees. But the responsibility was like, it seemed to land 100% in our court to prove that we were IBM instead of like people helping us. And so we ended up doing pilots with practically everything. We did a pilot with BigSQL. We did a pilot with DB2, and none of them quite worked the way that Vertica did. And we got like almost no help from the other teams. And so I would have, again, I get it in concept, the need to swap this out and make it IBM, because it was in your face. It was very visible that this was not IBM tech. But we would have appreciated some assistance. Does that make sense? And not have everything be on our dime to do the R&D on it. I think I included one story in the book about like when we tried to get like a cloud version of DB2, somebody asked us to fill in a form, like a paper form. Like, what? this is supposed to be the cloud. We're supposed to be able to click something and get an instance. So this is that was SoftLayer at the time. And oh boy, then you got other end of the spectrum. You've got people that really hated this. Oh, we also had Kafka in here. I forgot. We had.
Assuming you replaced this with Kafka.
No. We had it later in the platform. Sorry, I'm adding. I'm adding it in there. We had Kafka as a store and forward between the lake and the reservoir. These things remained on the left-hand side from the HTGs. Those remained ActiveMQ, but we used Kafka basically as a buffering mechanism in case HBase wasn't up. So when our transformation and publishing jobs ran, we could buffer that data in Kafka. So IBM hated that and said, well, you got to do you got to do
MQ. Yeah,
exactly. You got to do MQ. And at this point, now we're arguing about implementation details. And and then they obviously they weren't crazy about the ActiveMQ either, but like they were more upset about the Kafka part. Does that make sense? Because like for high volume stuff, people were looking at Kafka and not ActiveMQ. They were more upset about this. And I could take you through. I mean, and then this is just the high level. And the biggest product thing, the biggest product issue was rewriting. I'm putting this up there. Was rewriting all the Explorys products, and so this was a different set of arguments. Oops. So this, the rewriting of all the Explorys products, and quite frankly, all of the acquisition products, was something that was led by what was called offering management, which is what the rest of the industry calls product management, but at IBM it's called offering management. That was something that they were pushing, and we were like, hey, like that's maybe a great 5 to 7 year vision, but in 5 to 7 years, if you have no focus on the current products, you will have no customer because they'll all leave, and that's what happened. And so we had no shortage of, and that most acutely affected, Explore, EPM, and Supermart, because these are the things again that were customer visible. The infrastructure here is, the customers that we talked about it in presentations of, talking ourselves up of being big data experts and all that stuff. But like this is what they actually saw. And our offering management team was like, no, all new offerings, all implemented on the IBM Watson Health Cloud, which is going to be something on SoftLayer. But there was never any concept of how we were going to get from what people were currently using, what our customers were currently using, to the new world. And I mean, it's like product management and technical management 101 of, big upgrades are hard, but you got to do them. Otherwise people are going to go like, well, I guess there's no upgrade path. I guess I'm going to leave. I guess I'll find a new vendor because you're not taking me where I need to go. You're telling me that there's a gulf and I can't get there. We were arguing about things like we had a we had a CentOS Ubuntu because we had over 1,000 servers. all these things were running originally on Red Hat, and finance team at IBM was like, "Hey, this is kind of expensive. What can we do about that?" And so, the DevOps team went back and we're like, "Well, let's convert to CentOS." And this is pre-CentOS. This is back in the 2015, 2018 days. Probably 2016 maybe. And back when CentOS had a better, there's a lot of drama around CentOS now, but back then it was a open source license, open source version of Red Hat. So they swapped out Red Hat for CentOS. Finance was happy. IBM Finance was happy, but then IBM Research was unhappy because they said we should have gone with Ubuntu. And we're like, man, we can't make anybody happy here. There was also a small we had a small MySQL database also for internal metadata for our infrastructure. Basically registered organizations, registered measures, all that kind of stuff. And IBM didn't like that and wanted us to swap that out for DB2, which again, in concept, I get, but it's like at what cost? Like if you were starting over, sure. So I get the technical concept for consistency. It's just with everything else going on, is this really what we should be working on right now? So yeah, it was.
That's the funny theme about as I look through every single one of these things, none of them are ones that the end customer cares about.
Very few, very few, exactly. So the two that did, like Supermart and the offering management, I get those, but most of them were all internal details. Most of them were all things that no one would ever have any idea about. But man, we spent a lot of time talking about them and arguing about them. So much to the detriment of not just Explorys, but Watson Health in general. So yeah, where I would have preferred the conversation to go was, start with the product direction here, and figure out what we're doing from a product standpoint. And then let's make sure that we're carrying the products forward and the user base forward, and then figure out that path, and then figure out where that needs to be. And then I would have really loved some help here, because again, Vertica was a great product. Again, if there was an IBM product that could have satisfied that need, fine. But please help us. And then the SoftLayer aspect, I really think that at the time, IBM did not. I don't think that many people at IBM were looking outside IBM. And this is another thing that, it can happen to any big organization. It can happen in any organization anywhere. It's especially it can be more acute at the larger the organization gets. But I don't think that IBM realized how weak it was in the cloud space at the time. Does that make sense? Yep. They weren't comparing themselves to AWS and say, how do we how do we stack up? They weren't comparing themselves to Azure and saying, how do we stack up? They weren't comparing themselves to any of these use cases because they didn't have people internally that were actually building solutions using this technology. They were looking at it more from a checkbox of saying, well, we bought a cloud, we have a cloud, that problem's solved. You know what I mean? And not like, hey, can you run a big data solution in here, and how's it going to, and is it going to work, and how much control, and what's the cost. It was just because we're at IBM. Oh, and then I also got here's another one I mentioned in the book, an object store. It was a funny story. I met this guy from CleverSafe at an IBM meeting. This was another IBM acquisition for an object store back in, I think, like 2016. And like right off the bat, like I just met him, I described what we were doing, and he goes, "Oh, you're wasting money. You're wasting so much money." And I was like, "Really?" Like right off the bat, he was going after me. And I just kind of smiled because at that point I was kind of used to it. And I was like, "Really?" Like even though there's like HDFS, like that was a pretty good cost profile, especially considering the on-prem storage. They like we're not talking about like a storage area network, right? I mean, like the cost profile. Like nobody ever complained about like HDFS costs. Maybe they complained about the complexity, right? And like how metadata was managed and the name node and the failover, but like costs aren't usually something that people were complaining about. Is that, you know what I mean? You've had the same experience?
Yeah, it's still weird to me that now the object store has won and we don't do anything locally.
and yeah, he was giving me some grief about like, oh, you're wasting so much money. And even if like we had switched to CleverSafe, it was like, okay, how would we do that? Because CleverSafe wasn't available in SoftLayer at the time, and if people were upset about us having our own colo, well, then putting more things in the colo for CleverSafe, like that wouldn't have solved things. It would have been another IBM product, but it wouldn't have like addressed our cost profile. So there's just a litany of up and down the stack. Whatever it was, it had to get replaced with IBM technology. And again, any big company could be doing the same thing. It was ironic in many cases because there were multiple IBM teams telling you that you had, like in the database thing, that like whatever you were doing was wrong. But there were also multiple ways to be wrong even within IBM. And then similar with the operating system thing, where like IBM, like finance was happy, but research was not happy. So there's a whole lot of that. And
what would you say to somebody who said, "Okay, I'm looking at all this, and you just had way too high of a coupling on everything. You should have decoupled this, and you should have decoupled that." What would you say to that?
I guess decoupling what? Like you're talking like the reservoir to.
I'll take Kafka as an example. So when I taught Kafka, I always said, do not have a direct binding on the Kafka API. Your code should be doing shims, and you should be publishing objects. So you should be publishing an object from here via Kafka to something else. But as you're looking through this, I'll put some words in your mouth and say, you could say, oh, well, both of these speak SQL, but the SQL standardization between the two of these is not high enough. And then you say, well, you should have used a Hibernate or something like that. It doesn't quite work that well because you inevitably have to go down to SQL, and now your SQL is wrong between them.
Clean and generic interfaces are important. Between layers, and we did this reservoir is. I'm not giving it enough credit for the layers that are in here. Remember, at the end of the day, customer products over customers see. And if those work great, then people are happy. And you do what you got to do to make this work as clean as possible. And so we had here's another thing that's worth mentioning is we had weekly releases. We had a pretty darn good release process here. I mean, it started off obviously a little rough, but automating our releases every week. Sometimes you'd have hot fixes during the week. This code was everything from Reservoir on back. There was code going into production every day, so we had very good velocity. The fact that we were deploying every week was like freaking people out in IBM Watson Health. Like we were like a three-headed monster. I don't know how to describe us, but we went from being pariahs to three-headed monsters of like, what are you guys talking about? And we're like, no, it's deliver or die. Like that's the startup mentality. That's the healthy startup mentality. Of like, velocity is everything. So do what you need to do to deliver code that makes your customers happy in a way that people can still get sleep at night. Because it's a battle day over day, week over week, month over month, year over year, if you're successful. So do what you need to do to get the whole problem scaling. And we were there's a story that I was telling again in the book. Offering management was, they had this, somebody was big on doing planning that was now, soon, and later. I swear to God, this is a true story. Where they would have a column called now, a column called soon, and a column called later for planning. And even now was like, do you mean tonight? Because we could release tonight on things. Like, is that what you're talking about now? Do you mean now, like we're working on it now? Do you mean, like, what does that even mean? Like, if we want to do planning, how about we just pick months and say, here's what we're going to do this month, next month, the month after that. And at least there's a common sense of understanding, what timeframes we're talking about. Like, that's how out of sync we were with our offering management team. We were almost completely unaligned, to a degree that I haven't seen since, and I hope never to see again.
As I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about this, people may be thinking, okay, fine, that was 2009. We're here in 2025. But I think we're going to hit some very similar corollaries in our time or even soon. I think it's going to be the march back from too many microservices to smaller, either not batch services, not monoliths, not full monoliths, but marching some back into to larger monoliths. I think we're also going to see, as you have to move to a different cloud, this is the history is going to repeat, and that's what I want people to take out of this. So, what suggestion would you give them as they're thinking about that?
That's a great call out. Everything about the product side is tech independent. Like that can happen now. It can happen in 15 years. Like it's not just a story about what happened a decade ago. like that's something that is it's an evergreen, unfortunately an evergreen story. The other thing on microservices, mesh, any architecture that's hip, like it's like, oh well, if you don't do it mesh, then you're not doing it right. Remember the big picture. The big picture is this working for your customers, and are you delivering code, and can people maintain it and go to sleep at night? And a pattern that I've seen for the past 25 years is, and this can happen on the tech side, this is usually where it starts, is somebody gets the latest trendy idea, and it's like, then this is what you have to do everywhere. And then it winds up being, again, too much of a knob in one area, or trying to do that knob everywhere. A story from I don't have this in the book, but this happened back at Everstream. there was somebody that got really into mock objects early on after I had started. And I don't know if you remember like the mock object craze.
For unit testing?
Yeah. And again, they have their place, but this person mocked up so much code that none of the actual code wound up getting tested. I swear to God, this actually is true. And I was like, I'm not going to say their name, but like you realize what's actually like the reason why we're having so many production issues is like the actual code is not getting tested. So we actually had to remove remove a lot of the mocking to make sure that the real stuff actually got tested. Sounds crazy, but yeah, it actually happened. But I've seen people go, too wide with mesh, too wide with microservices. It's like, okay, who's maintaining it? Where is it deployed? How are we doing? Is it failing? Is it maintainable? Are people sleeping at night? Like if you're not taking that whole picture into account, you're missing something. And similarly, like what I loved about the Lambda architecture, so Lambda architecture at the time was, a conceptual architecture for merging in, batch and near real-time data. And I love the pragmatism of the Lambda architecture because like most of what you see here is batch. We didn't have that much near real time. We did have some, but like most of this flow is batch, and it worked darn well for what we were doing. And the reason why the batch lineage works so well in healthcare is the lineage is so important. And there's so many calculations that depend on other calculations, depend on other calculations, depend on other calculations that sometimes it's just easier to recook everything. It's easier to recalculate everything than to have the near real time approach. And again, there's a place for it, but for the complexity of the pipelines and for the cleanliness of the data that we were working with. So like here's an example from explaining like what we call like the blast radius of change. True story. We were ingesting somebody, data source, and at least back in the day, the data cleanliness in the EMRs wasn't always that clean. We saw a fair number of 6-inch people. You know what I mean? Where somebody goes one tick instead, or sorry, 2 ticks instead of 1 tick.
EMRs being electronic medical records.
Oh, sorry, electronic medical records. Sorry. The providers are busy, and sometimes there's data entry errors. Pounds, ounces, a lot of the stuff has been hardened, in the past decade, but you've got unit differences. And so if a height is recorded wrong, like in that case where someone is 6 feet instead of 6 inches, you say, well, that's just their height. Big deal. Well, the fact that the height is wrong also throws off body mass index calculation, right? Which is a ratio of height and weight. And if the BMI is wrong, then that throws off a whole bunch of other clinical measures that use the BMI. You see what I mean?
Or even prescriptions. Prescriptions are often by your weight and BMI.
And then there's other risk models that take into that may use that BMI into calculation. And this is just one simple example. But like you have this little bit of data that's wrong here, and then it has this cascade of failures downstream, where basically, we need, we had routines that would, either smooth out or go, okay, this is what you meant, or we're just going to have to discard it. And then you wind up having to basically rerun the entire pipeline. So we got really, really good at being able to rerun that entire pipeline quickly. And it was just easier to do it that way than to do it the near real time approach. Over Kafka pipeline. So we published it, use Kafka when we're publishing to our internal HBase model, but we had a massive data set where everything needed to be aligned all at the same time. All the cleaning, all the derived calculations, all of the imputed values, all the measures, all the registries, everything had to be aligned then. And it's just easier to do a batch. So again, there are a lot of real time, and we didn't lose any sleep over that we were basically less cool because we weren't doing the real time calculations for our core pipelines. So we built what worked for the business need and the clinical needs that we had in front of us.
Okay. So, given that you have so much experience in architect or being an architect, what do you think? What is your definition of architects, and how technical should they be?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think one of the biggest skills that an architect needs, I mean, obviously, spending years in the trenches and coding is important. Spending years data, analyzing data is important. But probably the biggest skill that I rely on now is explaining. I'm the explainer. I'm the explainer of what the problem is. And I'm the explainer of what we're going to do about it. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
that ability to communicate both in written form and also verbally, and demeanor is important, right? You need to be the calm person in the room. You need to earn their trust.
In which room? In the business room, in the technical room, both?
Every room, exactly. Every whatever room you're in. If you're an architect, that means you're a senior person, and if you're a senior person, that means you need to be setting the example, right? And that's hard. That places a responsibility on you interpersonally, and so you wind up using more of the what I call not just soft skills, but like hard soft skills because they are hard. It's not just about being nice; it's about the patience and the empathy, and then when you see a prior implementation of something, what's the empathy of, like, what were the constraints that they had at the time when they built it? Does that make sense? Because if you come in with a flamethrower and being like, oh my god, I can't believe what you guys are doing, like, you're not going to win that many allies. They're going to say like, yeah, he's an architect, but that guy's an a-hole. So really coming in and trying to guide as much as you can, and have empathy for both the stakeholders and what they're experiencing and then what they're currently using. Because the odds are you're going to meet the person that basically made the decision of the thing that you're trying to replace, and you want them to know that you're there to help them, and you're not there just to rip on the current like the current solution and make people look stupid. So yeah, again, tech skills all the live long day, but like as you progress in your career, got to have patience, got to be able to listen, and got to have empathy for your stakeholders and also the tech people that came before you.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you opening.
Thank you, Jesse.
Sharing so honestly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.